have a visitor today for this video. Well, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just got back from a 10 o'clock showing of Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, and my opinion might change the next morning, considering that it's 1 in the morning right now, but I think I'd give it like either a 5 or a generous 6 out of 10, translating to a letter grade of like a C plus to a B minus. The first Pirates movie, it's a fun little action adventure swashbuckling pirate movie. The second one is probably my personal favorite. The story gets a little more complicated, and I'll admit that movie does drag at points, especially considering it's like 2.5 hours, but the action in that movie, out of all the movies, the action in the second one, Dead Man's Chest, is probably the best. The third movie is just really long and kind of dull and just so much exposition, and the plot gets even more complicated in that movie, and it's just like, why? The fourth movie I only saw once. I only saw it the one time in theaters, and I thought it was really forgettable, and I don't really remember much that happened in that movie other than the events of that film didn't really tie into anything else, and the only significant thing you have to know is Captain Jack's ship, the Black Pearl, is in a bottle. Literal ship in a bottle. So, I went into this movie not really knowing what to expect. I probably wouldn't have seen it on my own. I only went to see it because a friend wanted to see it, and they're like, "Hey man, I want to see this movie, you want to go with me?" And I'm like, "Sure, great." I get off work at 9, so the only showing I can make is 10 p.m., and I'm like, goody. Yeah, so the first half of this movie, I gotta admit, is pretty fun. It doesn't start with the typical Pirates of the Caribbean opening, because, like, generally, these Pirates of the Caribbean movies are influenced by the ride, like, at Disney World and Disneyland, where it starts off, like, really creepy and atmospheric, almost like a horror movie, and then it gets into the fun stuff. So the first 3 movies I know start that way. Like, the first movie has the creepy scene of young Elizabeth Swann on the ship singing Pirate's Life, and the second movie starts with a guy getting his eye pecked out with a crow or something. I don't know. And then the third movie is probably the darkest of all. It's a bunch of people being hanged, and one of them is a child. And this movie starts with a 12-year-old boy tying a rope around his foot, attached to a sack of rocks. And I'm like, oh, he's rowing out to sea with this rope around his foot tied to a sack of rocks. Is he gonna commit suicide? Is that gonna be the dark opening of this movie? But no, he was just... It's something that, using the Pirates of the Caribbean's universe logic, helps, like, resurrect the Flying Dutchman or something, because Davy Jones is no longer a threat. I keep calling him Orlando Bloom. I forget his character's name. Orlando Bloom is the captain of the Flying Dutchman now, and he's like, son, why did you rescue me. And he's like, I want to break your curse, Daddy. And I have to find the Triton to do it. And then he's like, no, son, no one's ever been able to find the Trident. And then we cut to like 7 years later when he's 19 or 20, and he has, we meet this uh, empowered female character, which, I don't know, kind of reminds me of the protagonist of Force Awakens and Rogue One in the sense that she's the brunette, uh, young adult, female, strong female lead character. And, like, the Star Wars Force Awakens, I didn't even notice it. Rogue One, I'm like, okay, this, it might just be because this is Star Wars and that's why they're doing this, like, just to keep this theme. But now, another one, Disney, just, you can't keep repeating yourself like that so many times in a row. Dumb people like me are gonna catch on. But anyways, after that, I won't bother you guys too much with plot other than this. So, I gotta give the first big action sequence credit for taking inspiration from the new Fast and the Furious movies. 'Cause, like, you know that scene in Fast 5 where they have two cars and they shoot cables into a safe and they rob a bank by driving the safe into the streets, and the safe, like, goes back and forth and destroys everything as they're both driving, trying to keep it under control. Imagine that, but in the 1700s, give or take, with a bunch of people on horseback doing the same thing, and instead of just a safe, they're robbing the whole bank, and a whole building is crashing through the city streets. That's the opening action sequence of this movie, and it's amazing. Like, it's ridiculous, but it's awesome. Like, that's why it reminded me of a Fast and the Furious movie. But yeah, I bring up the strong female character because it's important to the plot, because this woman is like she's an astronomer, and the only way you can find this treasure is to use astronomy and stuff, and the villain wants to kill Jack Sparrow because Jack flipped him off at some point in the past. And how many people has Jack screwed with in this universe? Because we're 5 movies in, and in this movie alone, we meet like 3 different parties that want his head, basically. And you're just sitting there like, what has Jack Sparrow done over the course of his life to just, why? Eventually they're gonna run out of people for people to be pissed off at Jack in these movies. And without really spoiling anything, the resolution of this film makes me wonder how there could be any more sequels unless they get Cthulhu in the next one. Like, you might as well ramp it up from here, like the Fast and the Furious franchise. And that reminds me, with the Fast and the Furious movies, like, in the 6th movie, they had the 28-mile runway. In the 7th movie, they are parachuting cars from aircraft. In the 8th movie, they are remote controlling cars and driving them like zombies, and using a heat-seeking missile to blow up a Russian nuke with their car. And in the 9th movie, it's going to be either oil tankers and or cruise ships and or cargo ships all in a big chase sequence, and then in the 10th movie they all go into space. That's going to be what the Fast and the Furious franchise is going to become. And in Pirates 6, they're going to have Cthulhu. I just know it. And I could be wrong about this, and I didn't bother checking the credits, but I think the villain is played by Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. Because I'm like, that guy looks familiar. And then it shows him before the curse was thrown upon him, where he's just like a normal dude. And I'm like, wait, that face looks familiar. It is him, because I recognized his speaking pattern. Like, it was very similar to how Anton spoke in No Country for Old Men. But yeah, I gotta give this movie some credit. It's at least self-aware of its ridiculousness, and it's pretty funny. There's some funny jokes in there. Oh, and a little historical inaccuracy in this movie. There's a scene where they try to behead Jack with a guillotine, and this could be justified because they have a line that says, "Oh, we have this new method of capital punishment. It's called the guillotine," and they look at it and he's like, "Oh, and I knew I should have picked to be hung instead." So like in a real guillotine execution, they would take scissors or a knife or a sword and cut the person's hair short and then put them on the guillotine and behead them, because they didn't want hair getting in the way. And to be fair, that could be because it could be assumed that it's the first time or the first day they're using it. It's not the first time because they show the basket and it already has decapitated heads in it. And I keep forgetting how graphic these movies are for PG-13 because, like, at one point there's zombie sharks in this movie. Yeah, they show, like, rotting flesh carcasses of dead sharks that have been dead for what appears to be weeks, and like they have them come back to life to chase Jack Sparrow, and they're zombie sharks, and I'm just like, ew, that's kind of graphic for a PG-13 to show like rotted dead animals. And then just like all the usual crazy stuff. But you know what? This movie is, I mean, you'll have a fun time. It wasn't overly long like some of the other movies in this franchise. And like, it's nothing spectacular, but you know what? If you can get like a matinee showing or something where you don't have to pay full price, I'm sure you'll be fine with it. And anyways, since I've done several of these videos where I've just randomly assigned a rating and I never explained my rating system, I explain it to an extent on my IMDb account page, which there's a description for that in the link below. But just really quickly, from a numerical standpoint, I grade on a scale from 0 to 10. So I use 10, 5, and 0 as 3 benchmarks that I have specifically described. Like, a 10 means it's basically perfect. Like, I personally cannot think of anything could change about it that would make it objectively better. Um, like any tiny flaws it might have are very minor and are negligible in the grand scheme of things. Like, um, there are such things as perfect movies out there that are flawless, but I give some leeway with that because, like, if I was absolutely completely strict with what a 10 is, where it's an absolutely perfect film or TV show or whatever, like, almost nothing would get it. Um, then a 5 is complete. There's two kinds of 5 out of 10s for me. The first kind is it's just totally average and forgettable, um, and where it's like the it's fairly reminiscent of what I would constitute as the average movie. And then the other one is a mixed bag where the amount of good stuff I liked is about equally canceled out by the bad stuff I didn't like. Um, a zero, a zero is a score I almost never give. This is just something I reserve for the absolute worst. Like, a zero means this movie should not exist. This is an abomination of cinema. Like, at least with a 1 out of 10, a 1 out of 10 is like really terrible, but I could at least see why someone would like it, or like how someone could get something out of this, like in any capacity, or how there's any sort of artistic merit in it. Like, but a zero is just like, this should not exist. It's sitting through it is just a draining experience. This movie offers nothing positive. There were absolutely no redeeming values. There's absolutely nothing I liked. And just, it's just a waste of time. Like, it's a waste of effort. It's a waste of a movie. Like, it should not exist. Like, there's no possible way I could conceive of anyone enjoying it. Like, it's that bad. And I've only given, like, maybe 6 zeros ever. And again, they're in a list in my IMDb. But, yeah, so everything else falls appropriately between those three benchmarks. So it would go something like a 10 is basically perfect, a 9 is outstanding, an 8 is great, a 7 is good, a 6 is above average, or in the case of a mixed bag, the good outweighs the bad. 5 is average, or in the case of a mixed bag, the good about equally cancels out the bad. A 4 is below average, or in the case of a mixed bag, the bad slightly outweighs the good. A 3 is bad, a 2 is awful, a 1 is horrendous, and a 0 is this should not exist. There's absolutely nothing I liked, or nothing I could find value in. So I figured, even though it would make this video really long, I figured I would add just a little explanation of my grading system and translating that into letter grades. Just very briefly, it would be like an A plus is a 10, an A is a 9, an A minus is an 8, a B plus and a B are both 7s. Like, a B plus is a strong 7 and a B is a generous 7. A B minus is a 6, a C plus is a 5, C is a 4, a C minus and a D plus are both a 3, a D and a D minus are both a 2, and an F is either a 1 or a 0. And basically, anything 6 out of 10 means my overall impression is positive for that title. If it's between us and including a 6 to a 10, a 5 is like neutral or borderline, and then 4 and below is my overall impression is negative. But yeah, very briefly, just wanted to, not so briefly, but hopefully that explains everything.